Good evening to those of you who have joined us. I'll just give it a couple minutes here just to see if we have some more people join us in the next minute. Okay, well, I think we'll begin this evening. So first of all, good evening and welcome to the Public Information Center for the North Village Secondary Plan. My name is Mark Joe. I'm the lead planner, the lead municipal planner for this project. And so before beginning this evening, I would like to read the municipality's land acknowledgement statement. The municipality of Clarington is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas and Chippewa of the Anishinaabe, known today as the Williams Treaties First Nations. Our work on these lands acknowledges their resilience and their longstanding contributions to the area now known as the municipality of Clarington. For the agenda tonight, I'll just begin by saying that this is the third Public Information Center, or PIC as we call them, that we have held for this secondary plan, and we'll be holding one more this fall. There will also be a statutory public meeting early next year where the public is invited to provide their comments, and at any stage in the project, the public is welcome to contact us with comments and questions. The focus of tonight's presentation will be on three land use alternatives. So these alternatives or options show different arrangements for parks, schools, shopping, and different forms of housing, among other things. We are presenting these to the public for your input and feedback before we begin to develop an emerging plan. So the agenda tonight will lead us to these three land use alternatives. But first, we will introduce the team who has been working on this project, provide a review of the vision and principles for North Village, and outline the baseline parameters, or what are just sort of the minimums that the plans need to meet. We'll then get to the three land use alternatives and explain how we evaluated them. We want to make sure, though, that it's clear to everybody that we won't just be picking one of these plans. Like the final plan won't just be one of these. What we'll be doing is taking the best from each and combining those great features into one emerging final plan. And we'll be presenting the emerging plan at the next PIC in the fall. Tonight, we'll also receive an update on the integrated environmental assessment that's being conducted for Regional Road 17. And during the next PIC this fall, we'll be presenting the preferred alternative for Regional Road 17, as well as any other needed changes to the intersection of Highway 35, 115, and Concession 3. And lastly, and most importantly, tonight we will be having a discussion period. So throughout tonight's presentation, we ask that you enter your questions and comments using the chat feature. Members of our team will be carefully monitoring the chat and grouping any similar questions and then posting them to our panel. And we will do our best to answer. So please, as you're listening to the presentation, post your comments and questions to the chat. If you're having trouble locating the chat, it probably just popped up for you there. I think Kim just mentioned something in there. If you just move your cursor down to the bottom, little thing pops up and one of them is chat, and you can click on that. And just very quickly, I also wanted to say that this evening, throughout the presentation, we'll be posting poll questions. And so a window will pop up, have some questions and some multiple choice answers. And so you can answer those throughout. And most of these poll questions will actually be turned into an online survey that we'll be posting to our project website. So introductions. I have already introduced myself, but also from Clarington, we have Lisa Backus, who is the Acting Manager of Community Planning and Economic Development. As well, we have Karen Richardson, the Manager of Development Engineering. Delivering the bulk of tonight's presentation will be Kelly and Michael from SVN, the consultants working on this project. So I will hand it over to them to fully introduce themselves and their team and continue with the presentation. Kelly.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Graham. I'm a senior planner with SVN Architects and Planners. I'm here with my colleagues this evening, including Shonda Wang, Michael Mathis, and Kim Baruzian from SVN, as well as some of our other folks from the project team, including Steve Taylor and Darcy Dillon from BT Engineering, Kevin Phillips from ACOM, Harold Maddy from Urbanism by Design, and Sadie McCormack from Footprint. As Mark was saying, we are going to use the poll feature. So just to get you warmed up, we're going to start with a poll on who is in the room. So let me just launch that first poll, and you can you'll see it pop up on your screen. There are, as you can see, 4 questions, are the same in the dialog box that would have just popped up. And you can scroll through those as on your leisure. Okay, we're starting to get some responses in now. Thanks, everyone. Get those clicker fingers warmed up, ready to go, ready to participate. Okay, I don't see anything more coming in, so thanks, everybody. I'll end this poll and we'll move forward. So as Mark gave a bit of an introduction, we are developing a secondary plan, which will be the land use and policy framework to guide the development of a new neighborhood on the outskirts of Newcastle called North Village. And the secondary plan, along with a number of other plans that the municipality is currently working on, is rooted in council's priorities around sustainability, good urban design, affordable housing, and sustainability and climate change. As you may be aware, the Clarington official plan is the guiding high-level document that provides the objectives and policy priorities for the long-term growth and evolution of Clarington. It sets, based on population and job targets and priorities from the province, determines where and how Clarington will grow and which areas should be protected. The secondary plan is based on this. It was a framework to guide to more specific direction. And along with the secondary plan that we're creating for North Village, we'll also be preparing and implementing zoning bylaw and urban design and sustainability guidelines. In parallel to the secondary plan, the project team is working on an environmental assessment, which is the technical process for evaluating options for new infrastructure, which can include roads, sewers, transit, water infrastructure. One of the big things that we're looking at as part of North Village is the realignment of Regional Road 17, and specifically where it intersects with Concession Road 3. Currently, the intersection is below the minimum standards in terms of distance from the freeway, and that comes from the Provincial Ministry of Transportation. So we know it needs to move a bit further away. We know it also needs to be upgraded to accommodate additional traffic and to make it safe for pedestrians and cyclists. So Steve Taylor from BT Engineering will be talking a bit more about that. At our last PIC, we presented on the challenges and opportunities that we've identified in North Village and got some feedback. And we also shared the preliminary vision and principles. Some of the things that we heard was that people really love the rural character of Newcastle, but would like more amenities and housing options for people at various stages of life. We also heard that this is a community of walkers and people are concerned about pedestrian safety on Regional Road 17, as well as the other boundary roads in the study area. Mark talked a little bit about our timeline. We are just in the second phase of the study. We're presenting the evaluation criteria and the alternative land use plans. We will have one more public information center in the fall, which will be primarily focused on the Regional Road 17 environmental assessment. And then we'll have our open house and statutory public meeting for the draft secondary plan and zoning bylaw in the winter. Hoping to bring forward the plan to council next spring. What are we doing today? Today, we'll be presenting 3 land use alternatives that we've developed based on the guiding principles and the criteria that we use to evaluate them, as well as the outcomes of that evaluation. So we're really looking for your feedback on these alternatives. We will be posting specific questions as polls, like Mark mentioned, but we're also more than welcome to provide comments in the chat box and as well as any questions. We want to know what aspects of the plans you like, what you dislike, if you think there's anything missing, if you think there's anything that should be further highlighted, celebrated, we want to hear it. I'm now going to let my colleague Michael Mathis, planner at SVN, to continue with the vision and guiding principles.
Thanks, Kelly. Good evening, everyone. I'll take you through the vision and guiding principles, and next slide. So just this, before I read this off, the vision and guiding principles are 2 kind of cornerstones of the secondary plan. And they set out for us as the kind of project team, important guidelines and kind of signposts, if you will, as we move through the project and help us to make decisions about policies with respect to how change and growth is managed within North Village and within the plan area, which can play out at a very kind of specific level in terms of where should a park go, how big should it be, what types of uses might occur there, and what types of uses should be clustered around it in terms of, is it mostly residential? Is there a little bit of commercial? And how do we combine those elements to achieve the vision and support the guiding principles? So the vision for North Village is to create a vibrant neighborhood that is open to all at all stages of their life. It should be walkable and welcoming and reflect the rich community spirit of Newcastle. The guiding principles build upon the vision and add a little bit of specificity to it. And we have 5, and there's no particular order to them. They're all kind of equally important. And the decisions that we're making are intended to be consistent with these guiding principles. And these guiding principles, along with the vision, will continue to be used by future developers within North Village and also by the municipality when they're evaluating planning applications and development proposals within North Village. So the 5 guiding principles include creating a livable neighborhood. So this has to do with making sure that we're providing for a range of different uses within the neighborhood that are appropriate to the scale. We can't have everything here, but nevertheless provide for a great place to live. Of course, we want it to be connected as well too, and we want different options for how people get around. We know that a lot of people are going to be commuting to and from work. And in addition to that, we want to make sure that once they're at North Village and they're needing to be it downtown or to the neighborhood center, they have different options for how they get there. They don't necessarily need to drive. Cycling should be an option for those who are able, likewise with walking as well too. We also want the neighborhood to be beautiful and inviting. So this gets to the way the buildings are designed, the way the parks are designed, and how those qualities help to create a place that really shines and stands out as something that's special and kind of beautiful within the overall municipality of Clarington. We want the neighborhood to be unique, just like Newcastle is unique. So, certainly this isn't the only subdivision in Southern Ontario. It's not the only subdivision in Clarington. And it will have some things in common with those other places. But we want it to also enhance and embrace what makes Newcastle unique and stand apart for the reasons that make the landscape and the topography unique. So this shows up in a few different places within the plan, and we can get into that as well too. Also, with regard to resiliency, when we speak about that, we're kind of casting our gaze far into the future and thinking about how the decisions that we make today can help support the neighborhood to withstand impacts of climate change, extreme storm events, among other things. So this gets a little bit into engineering. So thinking about and working with our engineering colleagues to think about how we can accommodate extreme storm events and, you know, the added rain that may come with that, for instance, if it happens during the summer, and how the neighborhood can adapt and kind of respond to those types of events.
So building on the guiding principles, we did establish a number of baseline parameters, and these are minimum requirements that we thought all of the alternatives that we develop should meet. And generally these are rooted in the Clarington official plan policy. So, you know, the way that planning works in Ontario, all decisions must be consistent with the official plan. So likewise, a secondary plan that we're developing in Clarington needs to be consistent with the Clarington official plan. So that was really the basis for, you know, the barometer on these baseline parameters. I won't go through them in detail. We will be providing a land use alternative summary report that will be available for review on the project webpage within the next couple of days. Just doing some final tweaks and AODA compliance edits at the moment, but we'll be posting that shortly. So just to give you an idea of what some of these included, for example, under density, we've included the minimum density thresholds, which are in the Clarington official plan. And for housing, we have a requirement for a variety of dwelling types for all ages and stages of life, including the provision for additional dwelling units, such as basement suites.
All right, my turn again. So I'll take you through the alternative land use plans. And before I get into the kind of fun part of the presentation where we've got some new pictures to show you, I want to just outline a few basic assumptions that have informed the work that we've done. So I will be kind of taking you through three different alternatives, as we're calling them, for the land use plan that our team has prepared. But there's several kind of common qualities or basic assumptions in each of them, things that aren't going to change. So this includes a new water reservoir, you know, that the region is taking the plan and leading and has already kind of determined the space requirement for. So that's 2.36 hectares. We know exactly where it's going to be. It's in the same place with all the different plans. We also know that school board is going to require a new school here, and the minimum size for that is 2.5 hectares. So we've provided for a minimum 2.5 hectare site for the school in all three of the options, though there is some flexibility around the location for that one. And that is an opportunity where we're looking for some additional comment from the community in terms of where that's best located. Some other common features, you can read them here, but in terms of the neighborhood center, we're assuming that it would be the same in all three options. And the reason for that is because we want as much retail within the plan area as can be supported by the population in the secondary plan area, in the approved area to the south, and then also Newcastle as a whole, while not detracting from the viability of retail in the downtown. And that's really critical for us. So our work is supported by a commercial market study that was done that has helped to inform that kind of baseline assumption about how much commercial we're including here. Another critical assumption that's common to all of them is what the regional road 17 alignment or realignment will look like. And again, that's coming from the EA process. It hasn't necessarily been determined yet, but our options can work with different alignments. And for the purposes of today, we've just assumed kind of one common alignment for all three. Next slide. So I'll give you just now a very kind of brief high-level overview of the three alternatives which you see in front of you. They may look very similar to your eyes, and that is just fine. In many respects, they are. So if you're kind of squinting at them, wondering, what's different between these? Don't worry. They are kind of intentionally have some commonality between them. And that's going back a little bit to the vision and the guiding principles that we set out at the beginning. So things like the regularity of the streets and having fairly small blocks that accommodate a number of intersections, that helps to support the walkability and the connectivity that I spoke about a little bit earlier. So that's a common feature of all these plans. And one of the reasons why, if you're just looking at them now, they may look kind of similar. But what I will key in on right now is kind of three different aspects of each one. I'm going to talk a little bit about the land use, which is mostly going to have to do with housing. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about where the neighborhood center is located, and then how parks are kind of distributed. And then we'll go into some specifics on each one of these in the following slides. So starting with the land use, I want to call your attention to the shades of yellow and beige that we've got in the land use legend and that you can see on the plan. We've got a low density residential plus, medium density residential. And if you kind of think of those on a spectrum of housing types, low density residential, it's mostly detached housing, a little bit of townhouses, or kind of higher density, low rise housing mixed in, but mostly it's detached. As we get up to the medium density residential, it's mostly townhouses and a little bit of apartment buildings mixed in. And then the low density residential plus, in very kind of basic terms, is kind of a bit of a transition zone. It's somewhere in between. So just if you're looking at the plans and kind of imagining what these neighborhoods and blocks can look and feel like, that light yellow, it's mostly about the detached single family home, a little bit of townhouses, but then the shades of brown mix in more townhouses and more apartment buildings. The way that we've distributed those land uses through the three options does vary a little bit. So alternative one, we've got a little bit more medium density along Regional Road 17, a little bit more around Concession Road 3 and kind of the edge of the plan. And then we've also clustered it around the neighborhood center, which is where we have the commercial and the retail and the kind of shopping activity. And then also around the central neighborhood park off to the south and the east. And the reason that we've done that is to bring more people a little bit closer to key circulation and transit routes, such as Regional Road 17, also much closer to the neighborhood center. So you'll see in all the options that there's a good density of that medium density, the apartment buildings and the townhouses around the neighborhood center. That's partly to support the retail businesses that are there. So we're realizing that kind of synergy, bring the people, bring the shoppers a little bit closer to the retail. And then in terms of the parks, you see it a little bit in alternative one, but again, wanting to bring more people closer to those kind of amenities and those public amenities to kind of optimize the number of people that are close by and enjoying them on just a kind of day-to-day basis. Of course, anyone can go to a public park, anyone can use it. But finding little opportunities to kind of bring a little bit more people, a little bit more activity, a bit closer to those public spaces, it does help to activate them, as we say, or it helps to animate them and generate a little bit more activity within the community. For alternative two, that distribution is a little bit more clustered. So you'll see a really good density of the apartment buildings in and around the neighborhood center. And then for alternative three, it kind of tries to strike a bit of a balance between alternative one and two. We've still got a lot of medium density in and around the neighborhood center, which is that kind of dark burgundy cluster. And then we've also distributed it even more deliberately around some parks. And you'll see these kind of two linear green parks that extend north and south in the site, and we've clustered a good density of medium density in apartment buildings and townhomes around those. In terms of the neighborhood center, again, all these options included, it's all generally the same size, but we have located it in different places. So in alternative one, it's much more about trying to create this neighborhood main street just off of Regional Road 17. Part of the reason that we do that is because Regional Road 17 needs to be a specific width, which is fairly wide. I believe it's 30 meters, and Steve could correct me. But anyway, it's fairly wide for a kind of commercial street. It can work. But by having it off of Regional Road 17 on Street A, we can create a little bit of a tighter kind of environment. And we've got some examples later on of what that can look like. Alternative two actually takes the opposite approach. It looks at how could we cluster that type of activity in and around Regional Road 17. So here we've got kind of four corners of mixed use or commercial activity, and really bringing that type of activity up to along Regional Road 17. So it can work, it's just a bit of a different approach. And then in alternative three, again, it's a bit similar to alternative one, where we have that kind of neighborhood commercial main street type of feel, but it's off of Regional Road 17. Here there are two blocks where there's commercial right along Regional Road 17, which helps to bring visibility to the businesses that are located there, which can support their viability and their overall kind of business performance. The last thing to call attention to is just the parks, which are in alternative one, there's more of a focus on kind of small park areas distributed through all the blocks. Alternative two, it's a similar idea, but the parks are a little bit larger. So a couple of them have kind of clustered together. And then in alternative three, it's similar in the distribution as the previous two options, but there's more of an emphasis on creating kind of a long linear green park, which can also serve as a connection through the neighborhood, and a different way for people to get around rather than just using the streets. Because of course you can imagine there's going to be park or paths through the parks, and there's going to be people that are going to be wanting to walk and run and bike through them. Okay. Next slide, I'll get into a few details on each of these. So again, to assist a little bit with the visualization of some of these, with alternative one, and this is something that shows up on the other alternatives as well too, we're thinking about how we can engage Regional Road 17 and present a kind of an active front to it, and face it with buildings rather than having buildings that are backing onto it or that are just kind of side lotted onto it, which you may see in some subdivisions, and particularly some older subdivisions. So if you can kind of imagine the street, then there'll be some homes in this instance and some townhomes that are fronting onto it. And there wouldn't be driveway access for those homes off of Regional Road 17, but rather they would have access from a street or from a laneway in the rear of those blocks. Number two, if you locate that on the map, speaks to a couple of key kind of collector roads through the street. So in particular, what we've termed Street A, but also Street C, which connects south down to the approved area, and how we can treat those streets as really streets that serve a number of different travel modes, and not just vehicles, so also pedestrians and cyclists, and finding opportunities to integrate, be it a pathway or a bicycle lane kind of within that street. And also greening that street and making sure that there's sufficient space in the boulevard for tree planting and creating a really high quality environment. These are going to be streets that a lot of people use, so we want to make sure that they're presenting a positive impression to the community. Number 3 is about distributing and linking these smaller parks. So again, with alternative one of the things that sets it apart is these little kind of pocket parks that are spread around, which can be really kind of cozy and intimate environments for the community to kind of come together and really support that kind of casual, meet your neighbor type of gathering, the kind of unplanned activity that makes neighborhoods really good places to live. Number 4 is about supporting small scale retail. So again, a bit of a common theme with some of the other alternatives as well too. But setting up a tight, in terms of space, retail main street that is really pedestrian oriented. And then number 5 is about bringing that central open space. So in addition to all the small parks, we also need a larger park that can support bigger public gatherings, but also things like, potentially recreational uses, be it baseball, pickleball, cricket, whatever it is. We need to locate that scale of park somewhere within the plan area. And if we can put it near to the main street, then there's those two complement each other really well. You can imagine going and grabbing an ice cream, maybe going and watching your kids' soccer game, or maybe it's vice versa, soccer game first, ice cream second. Okay, next slide. So we've got a couple of questions that we want to take you through. And I'll just ask Kelly to pull up the poll, and then we're going to flip back to the previous slide so that you've got something to look at while you answer those questions. And you can move this poll box around if you need to take a look at any of the images that are off to the right, or if you need to take a look at the plan image. Yeah, the questions are fairly straightforward. So the first one is asking, what is your favorite design feature? So of the 5 that I listed off, is there one that jumps out to you and really resonates strongly with you? If not, and you want to pick the 6th option, then you can do that and maybe drop in the chat something else that you like about the plan. And then number 2 is about the location of the school. So in this option, it's located on the west side of Regional Road 17. And maybe just as you're answering those, I'll add, and this will come up again, that part of the purpose of these poll questions is for us to discern from these alternatives which features people like the most and which are kind of resonating the most strongly. They'll be used to develop the emerging plan out of these 3 options. Our purpose isn't to pick one plan. So that's why we're trying to tease out what everyone's kind of favorite and least favorite qualities are. How are we doing on responses, Kelly?
Looking good. I'm gonna shut the poll down in about 2 seconds. I think we're getting some good responses. Thanks, everyone.
Sounds good. Okay, so we've got land use alternative 2 up on the screen. In terms of the key features here, again, animate and enliven Regional Road 17. I said that was a common quality with all 3, and I didn't lie. Here, the approach is a little bit differently in terms of what it could look and feel like. So in alternative 1, we weren't planning on having really any commercial right on Regional Road 17, but in alternative 2, we are. And the way that we would treat that environment typically is a little bit different. It's more about kind of broader sidewalks, nice paving treatment, and these kind of things that you often see in a kind of neighborhood main street. And more about the kind of formal types of plantings in planter beds or planter boxes as you have it. that's more the character that we kind of envision for Regional Road 17 in Alternative 2. And really it's fueled by that location of the neighborhood center. That's the way that we want to treat and need to treat that type of environment for it to succeed and support the kind of shopping functions that happen there. And that would just extend along Regional Road 17. So again, and related to that is feature number 2, which is about creating that prominent kind of 4-corner treatment of the neighborhood center. So we've got a commercial block on all 4 corners of that intersection of Street A, which is kind of our main corridor or street through the community, with Regional Road 17. Number 3 is again a feature that shows up again a little bit in Alternative 3, but it's finding a place for the school where it can be a very prominent feature within the community, and locating it as a key civic feature or a point of civic pride. This was something that we, and I mean the very global kind of, we did much more commonly when we were building neighborhoods many years ago and kind of planning new towns, as the school would be located in a kind of very prominent place along with the church and other types of functions. So it's bringing back a little bit of that idea into North Village. Number 4, again, about maximizing density around the neighborhood center. So spoke a little bit about that. And again, this is one of the very strong features of Alternative 2, is just that cluster of medium density, which is mostly the apartment buildings and the townhouses and stacked townhouses that could occur in and around that commercial and school function in this case. As we move to the kind of western edge of the plan and we're up against the highway, there is an opportunity. Well, there is already residential development there, and that will continue in the future. And looking to locate a bit of a buffer there by using green space to create that kind of space and separation from the highway, which can also include a multi-use path or a trail that could facilitate cycling, running, walking, as you will, and connect to trails further to the south. Okay. So we've got another poll here for Alternative 2. Kelly will pull that up. Thanks, Kelly. All right, so same drill as last time. Asking here what your favorite design feature is of Alternative 2. Is it about animating and enlivening Regional Road 17? And I'd add to this, do you prefer this kind of approach with more of the kind of hardscape, call it urban Main Street type of treatment? If not, maybe you prefer more the green treatment that we had in Alternative 1. Are you in favor of this kind of 4-corner neighborhood center? Do you like the location of the school, distribution of density in this option, or the highway buffer zone? No shame if you pick highway buffer zone as your favorite design feature. And number 2 is, would you like to see the medium density residential clustered or more evenly distributed throughout the plan area? So this is about, if you can kind of think back to the other options, and maybe Alternative 1's the best counterpoint to this, where the medium density was really all around the edges of the neighborhood, and here it's much more clustered around the center. Curious to have people's thoughts on that.
We're getting the hang of the polls, so I'll just leave it open for another couple of seconds for a few more responses.
All right. So last but certainly not least is land use Alternative 3. So here, this one kind of focuses on bringing together a few qualities of alternative 1 and alternative 2 that that I think we as a project team felt strongly about. So one is kind of pulling the neighborhood center off of Regional Road 17, but keeping it close enough that we've got a little bit of visibility, and then treating it in a kind of unique way so that it's integrated with some parks. And in this case, we've got a bit of a green linear park kind of by the number 2 that runs roughly east-west and connects to a school at the end of it. So here are some of the other key features, and I've already mentioned a couple of these, are these linear parks, which we're calling green fingers. And they're included here to, as I mentioned earlier, provide different options for people to get around the neighborhood than just the streets, but also create a space and a public space within the neighborhood that can be kind of a common and unifying design feature across residential blocks that are kind of fairly far away from each other, you know, a few hundred meters, but they're all fronting on the same park. It's kind of a unique approach. And then by extending them up to Concession Road 3, the other thing that we're doing is reducing the amount of homes that are right on the edge against Concession Road 3. Not that there's anything wrong with Concession Road 3, but it will occasionally have some farm traffic along it. So not everyone's going to like that. Some people may come harvest time or not, but one of our considerations is how do we integrate this neighborhood with those agricultural uses, and reducing or kind of minimizing the exposure, if you will, of the kind of residential or sensitive uses to that type of activity is one strategy. So these green fingers help us accomplish that. Number 2, I spoke a little bit about, so it's just finding a way to treat that neighborhood center in a very simple but bit of a unique way, integrating it with what we're, again, a kind of linear green space along its edge, so that you've got those kind of 2 activities happening side by side. You've got a not very large, but a fairly generous open space where people can sit and gather, maybe grab they could pick up lunch or dinner or a snack from one of the businesses on that street, and then bring it over to this little park, and they could eat it there and hang out. So those kind of activities can play off of each other. Likewise, I mean, if you're a teenager or what have you in the neighborhood, and you don't have any money, you could just go hang out at the park, and at least you're kind of in the center of the action, so to speak. Number 3, again, this is a somewhat common feature with the other ones, but trying to maximize density around these open spaces in the neighborhood center. The way that we've done it here is a little bit unique from the other ones. So with option 1, it was much more about the distribution. Option 2, it was very clustered. And then option 3, think about it as something that's somewhere in between. And here there's a stronger emphasis on getting that medium density around the open spaces than there is in the previous options. Here, the school is a focal point, a little bit similar to option 2 or alternative 2, but here it's actually at the end of a street. So you can imagine that if you're standing where number 2 is and you're looking north and east toward the school, you've got the retail off to one side and the park, and then you're looking at a nice school that's really featured prominently within the community, and it sets up the end of a street, and it becomes a prominent view. And then here, the way that we've treated our boundary roads, in addition to having that kind of what I called earlier the active use or the frontage of homes to Regional Road 17, there's also some buffering that's happening around Arthur Street and Concession Road 3. So, finding an opportunity for a path to happen around the edge of the neighborhood, and some improved planting there as well too, to create a kind of softer edge to the community. Okay, and we've got one more poll here. So similar to the last one, first question is about your favorite design feature. So is it the green fingers or those linear parks? And we'll flip back to the previous slide. Perfect, thanks, Kelly. Is it about those green fingers and linear parks, that access that they provide and that kind of unique design quality, and also that little bit of buffering to the agricultural uses? Is it the way that we've treated the neighborhood center here and how it's integrated with that park, or the distribution of density in this option, or the location of the school, or Regional Road 17, how we've treated that, and the boundary roads? And then our last question here is about the location of the neighborhood center. And again, a little bit similar to alternative 1 in that it is on the kind of south and east side of Regional Road 17, but here we've located it closest to the approved area of the 3 options. So we're also trying to take advantage of the people that are going to be living there. And of course, you know, it's a little bit closer to than existing developed areas within Newcastle as well.
Just going to wait for a few more responses and then we'll close the poll. Okay. Mark, did you want to speak to a little bit to what the ultimate land use schedule is?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And thanks a lot, Michael, for taking us through all those. It was really something, you know, to see, you know, slowly going through all those. You know, we spent a lot of work on these, and just to see how much, you know, care and thought has gone into a lot of the details here. It was really, really great. Thank you. And I sort of asked for a moment here to interject because these alternatives that we've seen are really, you know, great, and they have all of this detail in them. And I just wanted to make sure that the public and everybody knows that when we get to the secondary plan and we have what we call a schedule, you know, a map that goes with the secondary plan, it won't have all of these details on it. It'll look a little bit more like the one that we see on the right. That's not to say that those details won't be part of the plan. We'll find them either as policy, you know, in the secondary plan themselves, or we may see them in what's called a demonstration plan. So Kelly had mentioned that as part of the secondary plan, there'll be these sustainability and urban design guidelines. And within the guidelines, there'll be a map in there that'll look a little bit more like these alternatives that we're seeing tonight, you know, with the local roads and the laneways. You know, we'll also see things probably like walking sheds, you know, like the circles. This is how long it takes to walk from this area. Gateways and all those kinds of things. Well, we might see a gateway on the schedule, but I just wanted to point out, so, you know, we do come out with the secondary plan and you see, you know, a little bit more of a simple map that people are thinking. It's like, well, what happened to all these great ideas? And so, but we will find those details and all those interesting things within either the policies, you know, within the text of the secondary plan or within that demonstration plan. So I just wanted to give everybody a heads up on that. So, so Kelly, I think you were going to take us through the evaluations and how these alternatives were evaluated.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Good segue. And the evaluation criteria, which we were really important to be able to tease out the differences between the 3 alternatives and just evaluate how they perform relative to each other. So these evaluation criteria were developed based on input that we got from the public and other stakeholders. They're rooted in the guiding principles for the North Village, the Clarington official plan, as well as the Clarington Priority Green Standard. And I'll just repeat what Mark said. We're not using these evaluation to choose one winner. We're going to draw upon some of the best characteristics of each of the alternatives to create the emerging land use plan. And I'm going to go through this at quite high level, but as I mentioned, the land use alternative summary report will be available on the project website in the next couple of days, and you can dig into all of the details there. So around the principle of livability, we had a number of criteria that related to density, housing types, jobs, and land use compatibility. You can see the score at the bottom of the screen. Alternative 3 did score the highest on the criteria related to livability. As you recall from the land use alternatives that Michael shared, it does have the greatest distribution of densities and building types across the study area and provides that green buffer along the boundary roads. As alternative 2, as Michael was saying, concentrates medium density and other non-detached units, generally around the center of the plan. So it didn't score as high in terms of distribution, but all of the alternatives had similar potential for jobs because they're all based on a consistent assumption about the commercial and retail floor area as part of the neighborhood center. We've also got alternative 1, which is similar, but didn't do quite as well as alternative 3 on this one. In the category of connected, a lot of these criteria related to mobility, specifically for walking and cycling, mobility and access. So alternative 2 put the most people within the shortest distance of key neighborhood amenities, specifically the neighborhood center, the school, and parks. Interestingly, like the road networks, although similar across the 3 alternatives, did have some differences. And we found that alternative 1 had the shortest average block length. So that means that there's shorter blocks, potentially shorter distances to walk. Alternative 3, by a similar but slightly different measure, had the highest intersection density. So that's a measure of basically like the network and how connected it is, the number of intersections within a particular area. So alternative 3 scored the highest on that. All of the alternatives did provide a relatively equal number of homes within short distances of connected cycling routes. But one thing to be clear on is that the area is quite small, only 500 meters across. So everybody's pretty close to everything. And for some of these measures of walkability and proximity, we did consider the approved area to the south. There are all sorts of people going to be living in the approved area to the south. It's not like there's going to be a fence. It's going to feel like one neighborhood. So we wanted to make sure that the ultimate emerging land use plan and design for North Village, the north area, the study area that we're working on here, will be supportive of everyone in the community. The guiding principle of a beautiful community was a bit challenging to evaluate at the level of the land use plan, because we're not yet considering building design, streetscape design, public art, park design. Those all come much later. We did think about, is there an opportunity to provide views to important landmarks and natural features, which can be designed and enhanced to be more beautiful or to be able to enjoy their natural beauty. And we did find, we also considered the distribution of parkland because parks are beautiful, and all of the alternatives scored quite similarly. They have a relatively similar distribution of parks. As you'll recall, although alternative 3 did have the greatest amount of parkland per 300 units, which was the metric that we used for parkland access. And then the street alignment, interestingly, as I was saying, some of the street alignments did vary. The street alignment for alternative 2 was oriented in such a way that it provided for the greatest number of views to important landmarks, so the school, the neighborhood center, as well as to natural features. So that includes the agricultural and natural areas on the boundary roads and key parks that are within the land use plan itself. So here we did see alternative 3 scored the highest on the criteria related to a beautiful community. For the unique Newcastle community principle, this one was also a bit challenging to do at the level of a land use plan. Nobody would say that you can determine what's unique based on colored blocks on a map. But one of the emerging things that we think is going to make North Village very unique and special is the neighborhood center. It's going to be one of the defining features of this community. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on what this neighborhood center should include. So we developed a couple of criteria that were related to accentuating the neighborhood center, providing access to the neighborhood center, and as well as visual and physical connections to the neighborhood center. Alternative 1 and 3 performed equally well because of both had a similar concentration of density around the neighborhood center. But like I said, the whole area is quite small. So no matter what, is quite accessible to all. One thing to keep in mind was alternative 3 had the neighborhood center the most to the south. So it's also most accessible for folks in the approved subdivisions to the south. Around the principle of resilient, we took a number of criteria on sustainability and resilience to climate change from LEED, other sort of metrics that are out there for green neighborhood design. We looked at the potential for walking and cycling and using transit. We looked at the proportion of open spaces that provide opportunity for green infrastructure. This is key for natural stormwater management. We've also looked at the potential for the greatest number of trees. So we applied an assumption of tree coverage for parks and public streets. Then we looked at the alignment of the streets themselves for the potential to maximize solar heating and decrease energy bills. So one thing that is interesting is that homes with a southern orientation, so a larger face towards the south, more windows, there's potential for greater solar heat gain in the winter to decrease your energy bill from heating. So if we had more sort of east-west oriented streets, potentially more opportunities for those south-facing windows. Lots of explanation on this, and it's really interesting to try to apply some of these sustainability metrics and standards to a land use plan at kind of this level of detail. But as you'll see, alternative 3 did score the best on this one, alternative 1 just a little bit less, and then alternative 2. At the bottom of the screen, you can see the overall score. I think you will not be surprised that alternative 3 performed the best overall with a total score of 34. Alternative 1 was close behind with a score of 29, and alternative 2 had the lowest score at 26. We're not going to be choosing alternative 3 just because it was the best. We'll probably move forward with using alternative 3 as a baseline and then weaving in some of the better performing aspects of alternative 2 and alternative 1 to create the emerging land use plan. And of course, we're looking for your feedback. If there's one thing that you particularly liked or disliked about any of the alternatives, we do want to hear it. And you can submit that information in the chat, or you can go on the website and submit by email to the project email address. I'll now turn it over to Steve Taylor, who is the lead on the Regional Road 17 environmental assessment, to provide an update on that.
Thanks, Kelly. So I know the focus of tonight's meeting has been about the land use plan and evolving to a preferred approach. In parallel with that, we're doing the transportation work, and really what the transportation work is going to do is going to confirm the transportation serviceability for whatever the land use plan evolves to be accommodated. And the transportation component includes two aspects. One is the Regional Road 17 and Concession Road 3 work, which BT is doing. And Kevin Phillips, who's also on the line tonight from AECOM, is covering off the EA component of the integrated EA for the local and collector roads within the community. Next slide, Kelly. So this slide is, I know it's an eye test, and I don't want you to look at the text in any of the boxes. It's just to describe that it's a comprehensive decision-making process that's mandated by the province for us to choose transportation solutions. And it has 5 guiding principles from MECP, and that is that we have a baseline of environmental conditions from which we're going to choose our preferred solutions, looking at all reasonable alternatives, traceable evaluation, meaningful public consultation, and then clear and concise documentation. And in this case, the documentation is going to cover off the land use planning, the Regional Road 17, arterial road decisions, as well as the local collector roads within the community. And as following one of Kelly's early slides, we are here. We're about halfway through the process, and it's waiting for the decisions from the land use plan that will finish off the transportation plan. Next slide. So the basis of all the land use plans that are being considered is the alignment for Regional Road 17. We're going to be following design standards from the Ministry of Transportation in the region, and that has formulated a narrow band of alternatives that we're looking at, meeting their criteria. And we've shown them as east, centered, and west alternatives. And the variation will probably be at the north end, where we have a residential dwelling unit with cultural heritage potential that may be the determinant of where the connection is at the north end of Concession Road 3. Next slide. So along Regional Road 17, we looked at a number of alternatives, rural or urban cross sections, and the urban cross sections have curbs. They end up with more green space with them, more lateral space, so smaller right away. The ones that we carried forward are going to utilize a 30-meter right away, just confirming what Michael had said earlier. We got variations in looking for tonight. The options could include sidewalks or sidewalk and multi-use path. And from a transportation perspective, we generally like to accommodate each modes of travel on their individual space. And the location of sidewalks or multi-use paths could be a function of the land use plans evolved tonight. But we'll be looking for comments tonight from members of the public about the inclusion of a multi-use path separate and distinct from a sidewalk, as opposed to having 2 sidewalks along the street. Next slide. So one of the aspects of at the North End connection, most of the trips that are destined for the GTA 407 Peterborough destinations to employment areas to the north will be through the interchange at 11535. It'll include all the trips that are coming out from the North Village secondary plan, as well as the approved areas that's the south. So we have a block of dwelling units all the way to the railway that the predominant trips out of the communities will be up to this interchange. The key aspect of all those routes is the safety of vehicles entering and exiting the freeway, and the friction that leads to congestion going back onto the highway. And we have a range of alternatives that will go from the ones on the left on the screen are minor changes to the existing road network, have less performance for improved traffic operation and safety, to ones that start to move to better circulation for trips coming off the freeway. The second one, the 2B, has a roundabout, close proximity, and there's 2 versions of the one with the roundabout. If you go to the next line, Kelly, it kind of progressed up to higher levels of transportation service with greater effects to likely the McDonald's for trips that would be destined back to the freeway. These 2, 3, and 4 provide improved operation by removing some of the trips that are destined to the interchange and not go through the intersection close to the McDonald's. But again, they have a trade-off where they take more land consumption and they require trips that are leaving McDonald's and heading northbound to go easterly on Concession Road 3, do a U-turn and come back through one of the roundabouts. We're waiting for the land use plan to be defined, so we'll do traffic modeling to compare these options to what level we need to provide transportation service to serve the number of units that are going to go into the community. That will be presented at the next PIC in the fall. Next slide. Again, these are poll questions. We're just looking for input perspectives. We gathered some comments on the alternatives at the last PIC in the fall, but perspectives of interest between roundabouts or conventional signalized intersections, the trade-offs between affects the business access, predominantly for the McDonald's, versus probably improved traffic operation and safety by making it more free flow in the area of their current intersection. And the third question is again another trade-off between having include additional roads and land impacts to accommodate them as a trade-off to trying to get improved operation and safety to and from the community to the freeway. And the last comment I was going to make is the better we make it for free flowing to and from 35115 will avoid people avoiding the route because of congestion and then taking other routes going down through the existing community to the south. So we want to make it safe. We want to make it free flow and convenient for people from this community.
Just going to go to the other page so people have some more visuals. There's a lot of content here.
Can you slide the poll question to the right on the screen?
Yeah, you can grab it and slide it over on your screen.
There you go. And then you can see the 2 options. Again, these 2 options, the number 4 has the highest number of other roads, the longest distance for people leaving McDonald's to get back to the freeway. An alternative 4, we put an arrow on the top right-hand corner. It was an issue that came up at the last PIC, thinking about access to the schools that are to the north to reduce pedestrian travel along the freeway. And with the new land uses in place, the destinations may not be the Popeyes and McDonald's that are today. They may be to the neighborhood center that is going to come with the new community.
Just had a note that question 3 has the same answer, and so I apologize for that. That was a typo. But if you'd like, you can please enter your opinion about new roads or no new roads. So essentially, that's this page, these options versus these options, and yeah, please enter your responses in the chat.
And that's, do you prefer the additional roads that are performance versus less additional roads to reduce land use impacts?
There's a few more responses coming in, so I'll just give it maybe 10 more seconds.
And like I said, the performance of these options will be predicated on the land use plan and the number of dwelling units that we have to service.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. All right, next steps. This is back to me. Thanks, Steve, for providing that overview. We've got coming up, as I mentioned, it's not on the slide, but we have prepared a land use alternative summary report, which has all of the content that you saw today, plus all the details, the detailed evaluation, including all of the metrics. And we'll make that available on the project website within the next couple of days. But then with the information that we've gathered tonight, with all of your questions and comments as well in the chat, we'll be preparing an engagement summary report that will also feed into our sort of phase 2 capstone. So we'll close this phase of the project with a phase 2 summary report that will include the alternatives as you saw them here, all the EA work, and then some of the feedback that we got tonight and some of the directions for the emerging land use plan. Here's that timeline slide again. We do have some opportunities for public input. We have an additional PIC, as Public Information Center, which will be focused on Regional Road 17. That's coming up in the fall. Then we've got the statutory public meeting, which will likely be in the winter, and we're looking to winter or spring of next year for the final council approval of the secondary plan and zoning bylaw. Now we've got time for discussion. So I appreciate everyone for putting questions into the chat. I'm going to invite a panel, Mark Joel, Senior Planner with Clarington. And if everyone can just turn on your cameras, I'll go through the introductions. We've got too much on my screen at the moment. So let me just check in on that. So Mark, thank you. We've also got Lisa Backus, who's Acting Manager, Community Planning with the Municipality of Clarington, Karen Richardson, who's the Manager of Development Engineering with the municipality, Michael Mathis, who you've met already from SBN, and Steve Taylor, President of BT Engineering and the lead on the Regional Road 17 environmental assessment. I'm just going to go through the questions that I've had and had some help. I don't want to have too many questions this evening, but that's okay. Maybe we've provided all the information that you need at this time, or maybe you just gotten information overload. You want to take it away and get back to us by email. That's totally fine as well. So let me just take a look at what we've got here.
And if there's other questions that come up as we're chatting, then please do drop those in the chat, and then we'll do our best to respond to all of them.
The other thing I typically mention is if you're not sure about a question, but if you got any uncertainty about something that's been said, feel free to ask it, because if you thought about the question, there's others probably in the group that have had the same question.
So I've got one question here just from the beginning, which is about how are we going to ensure that what we're talking about here, the great vision and principles and some of the directions in the alternatives, how are we going to make sure that these will be guarded? We have a comment from Brian who says that we've seen minor variances on small commercial units turn small commercial units into big chain stores in central Newcastle. And maybe Mark, I'll leave this with you. You can talk a little bit about how the secondary plan gets implemented and how do we ensure that what actually comes out of it, what we see that gets built, how that is aligned with what we're talking about today.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And that's a really good question. I guess the first thing that comes to mind is we make sure that we get it right in the secondary plan. We make sure that we've got, we're doing this public engagement and that we've got support from the community, and support, from the municipality, from council, and the development community as well. And of course, the secondary plans are policies, but then they do get implemented through zoning bylaws. So before any development starts to happen in here, we will be putting those zoning bylaw provisions in place, to make sure that where we've said that there's supposed to be commercial mixed use, there will be identifying where those parks are and all those other kinds of things. So yeah, so I think that, but I think going back to what I was first saying, just about making sure that we're careful to make sure that we get these designations right, so that we don't have to go back and change things, or we get people coming with development applications and they want to see things completely different. But yeah, I think that about covers it.
We do also have to remember too, in the fullness of time, our secondary plans are for a fairly long period of time, right? Same as our OP, like 25 years. So at some point in the future, perhaps there is a shift in the market. There's shift in demand, a different land use is proposed. We have to receive Planning Act applications. There is, most of our Planning Act applications, council is the decision maker on that. So although there, may be objections from the public, there may be objections from landowners, there is always a public process for these development proposals. So although, we're going to do the planning for the secondary plan, we're going to implement it through the zoning bylaw, the building may get built, something changes, and a Planning Act application comes in. So the Planning Act allows for public consultation. There's the public consultation process. Not everybody likes the outcome of those, but again, there's a public process for everyone to be involved in, should a change be needed at some point in the future.
Thanks, Mark and Lisa. The next question is also a planning question, from the beginning, wanting to understand, are the percentage of the three different land use categories, the densities, are they comparable in the three alternatives? And also a question about what is the approximate number of residents who will be living in the secondary plan area? And Michael, I'm wondering if I can give this one to you.
Sure. Thanks, Kelly. So are the percentages of the land uses the same in the three alternatives? They are not. And I don't have the exact percentages in front of me right now, but it is included in the land use alternatives report that Kelly mentioned that'll be made available on the website. Suffice to say that in my recollection, alternative 2 has the greatest proportion of the medium density and relatively the least proportion of the low density. Alternative 1 it's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, the greatest proportion of low density, the least proportion of medium density, and then alternative 3 is somewhere in the middle. And all three have the same amount of the neighborhood center within them. And in terms of how many residents are going to be living in North Village in the future, again, I'm sorry, I don't have that figure right in front of me. It will depend a little bit on what our final unit count is and what the balance of those different land uses are, because that will affect the number of residents. But one of our colleagues on the municipal side might have it at the top of their head. So if Mark or Lisa or Karen have that one at hand, help me out, please.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the draft of the summary report here, and I think each alternative has approximately a minimum of 1,500 residents, based on the calculations about, approximating how many people would be in each form of housing kind of thing. But a rough estimate that's certainly or a rough calculation, I should say. Certainly subject to change.
Thanks, Mark.
Mark, I have another land use question.
Sure.
Can you explain what highway commercial means? And this is in the plan, in the northwest corner of the plan.
Yeah, I think that was just to identify the existing McDonald's that's at the corner interchange of Highway 35, 115 and Concession 3. So it's just to identify something that's there. We don't expect that to change.
Thanks. I had a question around parking and road infrastructure. I guess there have been some challenges around parking and traffic volumes on North Street and throughout Newcastle, the village center. I'm wondering about just how the secondary plan will manage parking and transportation curve congestion concerns. And Steve, I know this is a broad one, but maybe I can leave this with you.
Yeah. Well, the intent is that there wouldn't be parking on Regional Road 17, so the parking will happen off the arterial road network, so collector or local streets. And sites for on-site parking would be dictated by planning policies. And for safety on the arterial roads, if we do have cycling that's happening on the road, we don't want the conflicts with parking.
If I can chime in a little bit too, I think from an active transportation perspective, one of the things we tried to emphasize is just trying to provide as many options for people to get out of their cars for the local trips. We know that's not necessarily practical for everyone who's commuting outside, which Steve explained well in his presentation. So that's a little bit the strategy as well too for managing parking demand, is trying to accommodate those local trips through other modes where possible. And a lot of the housing within North Village is going to be kind of what we would call freehold, but just, detached housing or townhouses and those kind of things. And the parking for those would be accommodated generally on site. We would allow for on-street parking wherever it makes sense to do so. But that would be more for the kind of convenience and visitor access. And then within the neighborhood center, as Steve describes, like the approach would be to kind of shield it from the street, but accommodate the parking that's required for those uses within the block for those uses. So it's not kind of spilling over to the surrounding neighborhood. But the neighborhood center is a good example of where the on-street parking really facilitates that kind of convenient access.
Mark or Lisa, I don't know if either of you have anything to add. This question was sort of oriented more towards parking more broadly in Clarington. Maybe there's some things that that planning is working on.
Well, I think, we do have parking requirements, every house has to have 2 parking spaces outdoors, those kinds of things, 1 parking space for every 30 square meters. But I think that, Steve, I think, the first comment that he made there about, there won't be parking on Regional Road 17. The purpose of Regional Road 17 is to help, accommodate traffic to get up to Concession 3 and out to onto the 115 and 35. And Steve mentioned it kind of quickly there, but one of the purposes of that is to people who are trying to get to Toronto or up to Peterborough or up to the 407 or something, that from that neighborhood, their option is to go up and around that way, not come down to King Street and those kinds of things, right? So yeah.
Thank you. That's kind of it in terms of the questions that have been submitted. So I invite anyone who has any sort of lingering questions. We'll take a few more if you have them. if there are none tonight, I think, we can let everybody go out and enjoy the nice weather this evening. And of course, there's going to be lots more for you to comment on in the future, starting with the summary report, which will be posted. And you're welcome to submit your comments on that.
Kelly, if they come up with a question after the meeting, how do they submit them?
Yeah, you're welcome to. The email address for the project is on your screen right now, so you can jot that down. Or if you just Google North Village Clarington, you'll come to the project website and you can submit any questions or comments there, and that is monitored and responded to by planning staff.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, Kelly, Michael, Steve, and the whole team. Really great PIC tonight. Again, if you have any other questions or comments you want to send us, northvillage@clarington.net's our project email. That'll come straight to me. I look forward to hearing from you. Looks like it's still light out there, so please enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks again. Good night.